Hi, I'm Nadia.
Hi, I'm Aaleia.
Hi, I'm Nameera.
And this is Operation Tomatometer.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Classics Most Tomaterific Film Podcast, Operation Tomatometer, where we talk about the latest recent TV shows and films.
So, if you haven't jumped off a 40-feet cliff, then you know about the Oscar-winning film, Coda.
So, Coda is actually a remake of the 2014 French-Belgian film La Famille Bélier, which is directed by Elliot Heath, not sure how to pronounce his name. And it recounts the story of Ruby Rossi, who is a Coda, or a child of deaf adults, who is navigating her way through high school and also her household obligations as the only hearing person in her family. So the 17-year-old is struggling to balance the fate of her family's fishing business with her new exploration of her passion in music, and eventually must decide if it will be worthwhile to finally leave her family and explore her passion in college.
Okay, so there's definitely going to be a lot to unpack today. But before we get into our thoughts, we're going to go into our favorite segment, which is Wrong or Not, where we try to have our guess at what the critics and the audience think about this film. So, I'll start off with the critic score. Okay, so I did personally really enjoy it, but not to be swayed. I would say, and it did win an Oscar, so definitely there is a lot of critical acclaim for it. So I would say that the critics gave it in the 90s, but maybe not to be too blindsided about how much I liked it, I'll say a 92.
Yeah, very similarly, I kind of went up like 1 point. I'd probably give it a 93 because I was on the lower end of things. I didn't want to give it like a much higher like 90s related score. Like I wanted to do around like a 92, 93 because there was a lot that was really good about the movie in terms of like actually like the cinematography and whatnot and deliberate choices. However, I do think a lot of the dialogue and the script was something that stuck out to me. Did not necessarily have the cohesion that I would assume an Oscar-winning film would have. So that's my case for 93.
Interesting, because I was the exact opposite. I wasn't too starstruck by the cinematography, but the dialogue I really liked. So we'll get into that later.
I agree with Nadia on that. I think that the dialogue was actually really good, considering that it's a film about a deaf family, and dialogue might not be like the most important thing that they were considering. But I think they did a pretty good job of it, except for some of the more cliche parts, which was actually my problem with the film, is that it was very cliche and verging on formulaic.
Yeah.
With, coming of age film. I was getting Lady Bird vibes through it, and Lady Bird was received very highly, so maybe that is what they were going for. And it was a remake, so there wasn't so much that it could have changed. But it still felt like it was just watching like a traditional coming-of-age high school film. But I think the critics would have received it very highly, considering that the story was just done very well. And there were so many high points to it. Like, even though the cinematography wasn't, it wasn't like ambulance, it was still... It was good for the film. There wasn't much to say about that, I guess, and there wasn't much to say about the score, which was kind of non-existent. There was some music, except for her singing and the songs that they were used. But anyway, I'm going to agree with Nadia and go with a 92 as opposed to a 93, so we're only 1 point off.
Yeah, you mentioned a lot of points that I agree with, but we'll get into that later. But for now, we're going to have our lovely producer show us what the actual critic score is. Alrighty, drum roll.
Okay, 94!
Hey!
So we were really
Okay,
close.
we were all
Nice.
A little higher than I thought it would be.
I mean, it is towards the lower end of the 90s, so we're on track with that, which I agree with. I think it definitely was a film deserving of a 90 score. Similar to what Aaleia said and Nameera said, it's not entirely perfect, but it does have a lot of heart to the story, so despite some flaws, I think it genuinely deserves this score. What do you guys think?
There was a lot of heart. I mean, it wasn't really my type of film. I don't really go for coming-of-age movies, especially ones that use so many cliches. And some of it was, I guess, not relatable for me and probably not for you guys as well, because we probably didn't grow up in schools where there was like a lot of bullying going on and a lot of this very like traditional.
That is true, actually. You mentioned that.
Like, I'm thinking like Disney Channel shows that I never watched as a kid, but that's the sort of thing that like used to happen in those shows, I'm guessing. But yeah, I think it might have been a little lower in my mind because it was a lot of very cliche moments, and some of the dialogue was cliche, but it was pretty good.
I would say a lot of it, only because, okay, the main, like, sore thumb of dialogue moments that's, like, sticking out to me is, like, when she goes to tell the choir teacher that she feels uncomfortable, like, singing in front of everyone else. I'm like, okay, we've heard this story, like, 14 times. She straight up says, like, I don't know, like, girl, you know, like, spit it out. But, like, that's kind of, like, the moment where I'm like, okay, this is kind of, like, I see where it's going. It's going for coming of age, but, like, I feel like coming of age, again, it's so exhausted, and it can be so, like, cliche, especially in a high school setting, that, like, I'm also finding myself comparing it to, like, other movies, like, say, Moonlight, which is still a coming of age movie, but an entirely different, you know, like, level as such, you know? Again, those cliches are, like, really apparent in this movie, especially with the dialogue, which, again, I know you all disagree with. But also, it touched upon a lot of different, like, other movies. It gave me the feel of Nomadland, a very, like, cozy house... Not cozy, but, like, cozy, like, as in, like, straight up to the audience type of feel. It wasn't anything, like, very, like, ambiguous about the movie. It gave me that kind of vibe. It also reminded me a lot of The Spectacular Now, the actual romantic dynamic, because it was so quickly, like, turned into something positive, which I did not like for that necessary thing. Like, I want a little bit more of, like, a development between that.
You mentioned all the great points, though, which I want to delve into further later on. But now to switch tracks onto the audience score, considering that people aren't thinking so critically as, like, the critics are sometimes, and I feel like they might be a little more, you know, affected by, like I said, the heart of the show and just the emotions that go along with it, like me, and how I cried when I watched it. I feel like people are going to be touched by, especially the family aspects of the show, because that's the main foundation of this story. And I think the cliche does derive a lot from her school life, but her family side of the story is what really brings it all out. So I would say that the audience would give it a 96. I'm just going to say that. I feel like it's slightly higher, or maybe the same. I feel like it's in the 90s, though. What do you
I'm
guys
thinking
think?
it's going to be very similar, because I don't know how much higher the audience score could be, because I certainly wouldn't give it any higher than a 94, and I personally wouldn't give it a 94. I think the audience definitely would have also caught on to some of the more formulaic and cliche aspects of it, but I do like what you said. and now that I'm thinking about it, I think the audience might have actually gone lower than the critics.
No.
Because I would go lower than the critics, and maybe other people would have the same thoughts. And
me though. I'm usually an outlier, so we can't.
There was a lot of heart in it, but the audience might have been a little pickier with a lot of it, especially since we've seen a lot of films like it, and the audience would just be like, this wasn't such a great film. Like, it was really good, and maybe it did deserve to win the Oscar just for its storyline and everything, but it was also a remake, which I guess the audience would be thinking about. So I'm gonna say 91.
Okay.
So that's a little closer to what I would give it.
I actually kind of went one point lower than my critic score, so I'm going to give it a 92.
Nice. I'm very interested to see what it is now, because if it's lower, I mean, as long as it's in the 90s, I guess I'm fine. As long as it's in the 90s.
I don't think it's going to be in the 80s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was received very highly, so let's see.
Yeah. Can we have our lovely producer show us the audience score, please? I'm, like, nervous.
Thank you. 91.
Oh, you said that?
Yeah.
Oh my god.
So I agree with that. It is interesting that it's lower, because we don't see that all that often.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. I wonder what people's exact reasonings were, but I mean, it's in the 90s, so I'm happy as long as it's in the 90s.
Oh my god, I remember what I was talking about now. So the other movie that it reminded me of was Whiplash, just solely for the sake of the choir teacher and Ruby's dynamic, which I feel like was very much teetering on Whiplash, but, like, poorly done. Anyways, yes, that's the movie.
I mean, speaking of that, which I guess we can go into our thoughts now and start discussing further, that was what struck me also as, like, a big cliche, like that guidance figure, the teacher that's, like, trying to push you towards your dreams, which, I mean, it does happen in real life, I guess, not to me, but but, you know, it does happen. But I guess that big part, I felt like at that moment it was like a Disney Channel show, like an original movie. But I mean, I love this character. You know, he's a great actor, so I did love him. But yeah, that's one of the cliches we can see in this film.
I didn't mind that cliche as much as, like, the romance cliche, because I liked the portrayal of, like, having someone who was facing adversity all the time, who's had who has guidance from a person who is just pushing her to do her best, and also seeing something in her that she, not just that she couldn't see it in herself, but she didn't have the opportunity to see it in herself because she was raised by a deaf family, so she didn't necessarily have people telling her that she was like good at singing. So I didn't mind the cliche so much because it shows that if people are given a push in the right direction, that they can become so much more. And also I liked all the little things about that he was teaching her about breathing and about passion and really feeling the music and everything, and I really liked that. And in a way it makes you think, like, if I had had someone like that when I was younger, or adults thinking of that when they were in high school, if they had had teachers who were maybe pushing them a little more, maybe they would be somewhere different, or not even that, maybe they would be different people, you know, and that also makes you think, I want to be that person for someone else. But with the audience score, I don't think audiences would have thought about that as much, and some people, now that I'm thinking about it, might have not liked it because they might be a little biased against the portrayal of deaf people, which is kind of sad to think about, that they would be like, we don't need a movie about this. And I completely disagree with that, and I would go lower simply just because, not because of the actual storyline, but because of how they use the storyline, and they could have done a little better on that, I think. But was this made during the pandemic?
I'm not sure.
Probably. So I can excuse some things when they were facing a lot.
Wait,
of
can you
things.
go further, like, into what you mean? Because I'm interested now. Like, what exactly about, like, the representation or, like, storyline did you have, like, problems with?
Because it's a remake, right? So I can excuse some things about it, like some of the cliches with the romance and everything, but I feel like they could have changed it a little bit to make it a little less formulaic. Just like the process of how she realized, like, her attraction to the guy and their relationship and jumping off of the cliff into the water. It was just, it felt like something that you'd seen time and time again.
Yeah.
So I don't know what else they could have done, but they're also the professionals, so maybe they could have figured out a different way of portraying it. Could also be that we're high schoolers, and so what we're seeing is something that doesn't necessarily relate to our time in high school.
But yeah, when comparing cliches, I would say, like, absolutely, I really enjoyed the teacher, if anything. Like, that was definitely a good push for her, and that did, like, have substance and push the story along. But yeah, trying to consider the love storyline with Ruby and I forgot his name. Miles. Miles. I'm trying to think exactly. Like, did it push the story along?
No. I don't think it did anything for her character development, and it really, I don't know, it didn't. Did you think that it helped her character along, or did it?
I'm trying to think about it. I don't think so.
I
feel like it did neither. I feel like it was just there. Whereas I would have wanted a little more insight on the actual family. Like, that's the relationship I cared more about, the family relationship, and kind of even seeing Leo's relationship with Gertie.
Gertie, yeah.
Gertie.
Yes.
That would have been a little more interesting, except for
like
the one bar scene.
That was actually cute.
That was cute.
I thought so.
That was just out of nowhere. I was like, oh, okay. But, like, seeing kind of that, because at the end we did see that their relationship actually helped out, and, like, she became more a part of the family in the sense to where she sat with him during Ruby's concert and whatnot. So possibly that was the better relationship in Coda.
I would say the same. But yeah, that scene when she's, like, trying to tell them, like, oh, she's singing so well, that would really touch me.
And they hold each other's hand.
Yeah, I really love that in their relationship as well.
But I do agree that the family, not even the relationship, the family's story was so much better than Ruby's story about the fish. I always wanted to hear so much about the fishing business and how they were doing it, but they just showed a montage of them, like, getting more customers and stuff. I wanted to hear more about that because it seems like something that would have been really difficult for them to accomplish. And Ruby was really pushing it along because she was their interpreter. But also everyone else in the family had such a big role in it as well. So I really wanted to see how their character development would have progressed. Even the parents. Because you don't always see parents developing in films like this. Usually it's just the kids developing because of their parents. But the parents also did experience periods of growth in the film. And I would have liked to see that a little more than just seeing Ruby and Miles, who really had no purpose in the film, and he could have just been a friend. I don't think they should have even stayed together.
I would disagree though in that regard, because when looking back on, like, a 2-hour film, I feel like Miles didn't have, even though he didn't provide much for the story, I feel like they didn't have him a lot in the film compared to the family. So I feel like they did flesh out the parents, because we did have the scene with in the bedroom with her and her mother, And then there's a
When you
scene.
said bedroom, I thought of something a completely
No,
different
not that.
scene.
We're thinking about a different scene with the parents. And then the father. I loved the father, like how it singled him out in the scene where she's having her concert, and you can see him looking around trying to gauge what the reaction is by the audience, and then you feel his isolation and just his confusion a little bit. And then the scene, okay, this is where I start crying. The scene where he asks her to sing for him. Now, I don't think that was a cliche, but like it was just so beautiful. And I was thinking, like, if he puts his hands on her throat to feel her singing, and he did, that was beautiful. Like that was just such a beautiful scene, one of my favorites. And so I just feel like the parents were kind of fleshed out, and we did see them understand her more, as compared to the beginning when the mother per se just rushes off her singing, saying it's a phase and she's a teenager. So I do feel like we got some growth in that regard.
Mm-hmm. You know, something also like admirable about the actual film is that they did use deaf actors, which I think is a huge step towards the actual film itself, like film industry. And I think that was very, very well done. And they chose, you know, a newer, fresher face to do, to play Ruby, who also knew how to sing. So like everything's like very like diegetic in a way. It's not very like mass produced or overproduced or anything like that. They really like tried to do the story justice in a way.
They did respect the deaf community as well, even in little ways. Like, I noticed they didn't try to cover up any of the silence with background music.
Yeah.
During, like, family discussions, it was just silence, and you could, like, hear the sounds that their hands made as they were signing. And that meant so much more to the audience than having background music. And you can understand so much just by seeing their facial expressions and everything. And personally, I had a new understanding of the deaf community watching this, even though I'm sure no one could ever really understand what it's like to not hear, because when people are born deaf, I'm sure they can't understand what it's like to hear, right? It's a completely different way of perceiving the world, and I feel like we really do get that from the film. So that's something that I think that they did really well.
Like going back to the soundtrack and how there was like an absence of a soundtrack, I also really enjoyed that. And then it only happens once, but they do that thing where they strip all the audio and you hear nothing, which I was wondering when I started the movie if they're going to do that multiple times in the film, which I kind of didn't want them to do. But then they did it in a scene that I think fit well when she's singing, and then right away like the duet is kind of cut off and like lowers into just nothing, and then we see from the father's perspective, and I think it was like a good choice to have us hear a little bit and just hear how well they were singing, and then you really want to hear more. And then you go into the father's perspective where he can't hear and be really fully a part of it. So I think that helped the audience step into his shoes for a little bit.
Well, I think it's about time that we move on to our newest segment, Seeds of a Scene. And in this segment, we take a deep dive into a particular scene from the show or film that we're reviewing, and we dissect it. So today we're going to be looking at the intricacies, the faults, and the most memorable moments in the ending scene of Coda.
Alright, so let's dive on into the end scene of Coda.
No, let's not make this a thing.
I have to say their insults were one of the best pieces of this movie.
Oh my gosh, we see Gertie. I love Gertie. I've said this before.
Yes, I love her.
And it's great to see her like really be there for Ruby
Yeah.
as like one of the only people who understands her struggles with her family, but also as her being kind of like a part of Leo's life.
Yeah, she's so supportive.
I like the slow panning in the shot because like she's slowly getting farther and farther from her family. And I also really like the lighting, how it's not like a super sunny day, how it's just like one of those fall days where it's just cloudy and you feel happy, but it's also not like ultra sunny and bright and everything. So I think they did a good job with like picking location and setting and time of day and everything for this shot.
Wait, Stop.
Oh, look at that. We do have a little bit of a score going on
I was just
here.
thinking that. I was just thinking that.
But it's kind of funny because it's a guitar score. And that
Yeah.
kind of reminds me of Miles.
Yeah,
just a little
me
bit.
too. Appropriate.
I love how this,
crying again.
yeah. I love how this is so cliche. How she's in the car and she's about to leave and she's like, "No, stop!" And then they go hug. But it actually is a really nice moment. So it just shows that
Yeah.
some cliches can be done well, and they were done well in this film, but others not so much. But by the ending, it does pull on your heartstrings a little
Yeah.
bit.
If you want to imagine what I was doing when I first watched this film, I was crying at this point, just for your information. Actually, I have something else to say. He totally deserved the Oscar for
Yes.
Best Supporting Actor. He was phenomenal, and I just love the father as a character.
So, can I just say that the use of sound in this film is phenomenal, and you really
Yeah.
see this towards the end. The sound mixing is just so good because it works so well with this being a story about a deaf family and a hearing child, and you have that little interplay of some moments where it's really quiet and other moments where it's more toned down but still has a good amount of sound that you can like feel emotions through the music and through the more intense dialogue and everything.
Alright, so those are our thoughts on the ending scene of Coda. And so yeah, overall, we really enjoyed it, but it does still have some flaws like every movie. But yeah, that's a wrap for today's episode. Stay tuned for more Tomaterific content from Operation Tomatometer on Apple Podcasts. Be sure to rate us 5 stars. And be sure to check out the Classics Instagram and TikTok page at THHS Classic to see our bloopers, behind the scenes, and other cool projects we're working on.
Thanks for watching. Bye.
Bye-bye!